Hi. So, um, this is a tough video to make, but I'm gonna make it because I don't know. Um, I was sexually abused as a child by 3 different relatives at 3 different times, for 3 different reasons. Um, one of them was my sister, who was being actively sexually abused all over the place. And I can't prove it, but I know it. And she was acting out what was happening to her. And so I don't blame her. She's 5 years older than me, and I was a very young child. She didn't do that much to me, but it was uncomfortable. And I didn't know at the time what she was going through, but years later I kind of put pieces together. And she's probably was being routinely raped, if not abused in other ways, most of her life. And I'm not at all surprised that was happening. She'll never admit that, but whatever. But I was abused by my cousin's husband, my cousin Sissy. She'd only been married for like a year and a half, 2 years less, something. They just had a baby, and they came to visit us where, I was 10. And they came to our home, and they were staying for about a week with their new baby. And I met her husband. I hadn't met him before. And his name was Bill Cruz. And we had a swimming pool in our backyard, and I was basically a fish when I was a kid. I learned to swim before I learned how to walk, in essence. I loved going out in that pool, and I was out there all the time. This was summertime. So it was an upright pool, and I didn't care if anybody was out there or not. I was going to go in the pool. So I was out in the pool, and Bill wanted to come in too. Now, that wasn't unusual. We had, when relatives would come to stay. I live in Florida, and they're all from more northern states and enjoying the Florida weather and a pool in Florida. It's something they all look forward to, and they're from North Carolina, so he came into the pool with me. I didn't think anything of it. I got older brothers, and I didn't think anything of it. And he swam closer to me, and he goes, I guess, I don't exactly remember what his excuse for being so close was. I don't remember. But he ended up wanting to tickle me. Those are his words. And he inserted his finger where it didn't belong. I was 10. And it was extremely uncomfortable, and I pulled away. And I giggled because I didn't know what to do. I was 10, and I was scared, and he was treating it like a tickle, and so I didn't know how to react other than to giggle, but to kind of pull away and get out of the pool. Sorry, my husband just came home, so the dogs were barking. So anyway, I giggled because I didn't know what else to do, and I got out of the pool as fast as I could. I didn't say anything right away, but the next day, again, I was out in the pool, and again, he decided to come in and join me. And so I tried to stay away from him, but I didn't want to rock the boat. I didn't want to upset him. I didn't want to upset my cousin. I love my cousin. And so I didn't run away when he came close to me, and he did it again. And this time, I got out of the pool as fast as I could. I did not giggle, and I told my mother. When I told my mother, I was at the dining room table. She was at the dining room table, and my sister was there. And I don't know where my cousin was, but she wasn't in the room. And I said, Mom, Bill did this. And my mother didn't even look at me. Instead, she continued what she was doing. And she said, well, just don't tell Sissy. And I was like, okay. And that was the end of it. She never said another word about it. My family didn't know because my mother didn't say anything. My sister knew. But my sister was being abused, so what was she going to do? But she just said, don't tell Sissy, and that was the end of it. I was 10. I told her what he did. And where his finger was. And she just said, well, just don't tell Sissy. My cousin ended up divorcing him like a year and a half later. And I can only imagine why. You know, the guy was a pervert. Total and complete. He was in his 20s. He was in the Air Force. He was supposedly a chess champion in the Air Force. And he had this really cool 1965 Mustang. And it was a really great car. And he was a full-on adult. And he did this to me. So, yeah. Anyway, and there was another family member who abused me. I'm not going to say anything of who, but I can remember at the age of 4 having bondage sex dreams. At the age of 4, sex dreams, I would wake up from them, that I was tied up by several people, and my bottom was exposed, and I was being spanked, and it was arousing. I was 4. What 4-year-old comes up with that on their own? None. And I remember, I guess maybe a year later, the movie True Grit came out with John Wayne, and at one point he spanks Kim Darby, and I got aroused by seeing that. I think I was 5. That's not normal. That's not normal. And by the time I was 7, I was fully aware of masturbation and bringing it to its fruition. I don't know where those urges came from other than the abuse that happened to me. Now, I'll be honest with you, I don't remember it. I don't remember it at all. Don't remember what happened. Don't remember how it happened. Don't remember any of it. But I know the results of it. And, you know, it always kind of messed me up. And, of course, I was raised in a very emotionally abusive household and physically abusive. My parents beat the living crap out of us. My mother, I know it was fashionable back then, but my mother would make us go pull our own switch off the oleander bush in the backyard, and we'd have to strip the leaves off of it, hand her the switch, and she'd beat the tar out of us with it, or with her leather belt. My dad was a psychopath. My dad was a full-on psychopath. He enjoyed beating us. One time he was mad at me for something. I don't remember what. I mean, he'd get mad at the drop of a hat. I never saw him smile. He never said, I love you. He never complimented any of us. He was never encouraging. He was always freaking mad. When he would go on business trips, the whole house would just... And then the day we knew he was coming back, we'd all be as tense as you could be. So anyway, one time he was mad at me. I was wearing a pair of shorts. I was like 9. And he whacked me one time on the side of my thigh, open-handed. And it hurt so bad, I screamed. My mother was right there. And they were in my room for something, and then they left the room, and I was being punished at that point for some reason. And so they shut the door, and I had to stay in there. I was still screaming 15 minutes later, and my mom actually came in and looked. Now, she never cared before. She never cared. She never stopped him from beating us. She didn't give a shit. But This time she did, because I was still screaming. And she came in and she goes, "Are you okay?" And I said, "It hurts so bad." And I looked down, and when I looked down at my thigh, I saw a bruise this big. I mean, it was this big, black on my thigh. And it had just happened. I mean, it was huge, size of 2 grapefruits side by side. It was huge. And I saw that, and my eyes got big, and I went, "Oh, Mommy!" And she went, "It's okay, honey, it's okay." And she said, "You can come out in just a minute, but just give me a minute." And she must have reamed my dad out, but she never did it in front of us, ever, ever. I never saw them fight. I never saw them argue. But he still left her for another woman when I was 12, but that's beside the point. And then he came back when I was 18, because that didn't work out. She wasn't the sexual freak that he was hoping she would be. That's beside the point. My dad was a psychopath. He was a sexual deviant and a psychopath. All of that I found out years later. But yeah, he was a freaking freak. And my oldest brother is a psychopath. And my next to oldest brother, I'm the youngest, and he is a narcissist of all narcissists. But I don't blame him. He was raised to be a narcissist. The problem is he's an adult now. He just turned 61, and he should know better at this point. But he married a psychopath, and she's worse than anything I've ever seen. So, he's never had an environment or a support system to help him learn how to not be a narcissist. So, yeah. Anyway, so then, growing up in an abusive household, and my dad was gone by the time I was 12, and my mom didn't care. My mom did not care. She loved her boys. She hated her daughters. Absolutely loved her sons. Hated her daughters. Never protected us. She never bonded with my sister. My sister's 5 years older than me. She looked apparently just like my father's mother, whom my mother hated. And she's autistic. She has Asperger's syndrome. So my mom actually told her brother and sister-in-law and several other relatives she could never bond with my sister because she looked too much like my dad's mother. It's like, shit. What kind of a mother is that? My mother was a horrible mother. My mother sucked. She is a narcissist bitch. I hate my mother. I hate my father. Hate pretty much my whole family, but that's irrelevant. I still took care of both of my parents for the last 2 years of their lives. I mean, my mom was very, very sick. She had normal pressure hydrocephalus. I'm the only one who took care of her. I took care of her for 2 years. And in that time, my dad was getting ill, and I took care of him during the time my mom was ill, and then I took care of him for 2 years more until I couldn't do it anymore. I was unable to. I had to get him a guardian, and then the guardian took care of him. All of which none of my siblings helped, and they fought me tooth and nail. But that's irrelevant. My parents were abusive, horrible people, but I still took care of them when they were dying. But growing up like that, I had no self-esteem. I was kind of led to believe, somehow, I'm not sure how, that in order to get love, you had to get it from a guy. And so I became boy crazy, if you will. I mean, I just wanted a boyfriend. I just wanted somebody to love me. And I didn't know any way to get it, so whatever. And when I was 14, I was like 2 weeks away from my 15th birthday. I started dating this weird guy in school. I thought he was cute. He was an artist, and I didn't realize that he was absolutely insane. But, I mean literally insane. But he was a couple years older than me, and I thought he was cute, and he took my virginity. I was like 2 weeks away from my 15th birthday or something like that. And I regretted that my whole life. And then I broke up with him fairly quickly, and then I started dating this other guy about a year later. I was still 15 though. Well, less than a year later then. I was still 15, and I told him about, having lost my virginity, and I didn't like it, and I didn't want to ever do that again until I was married. I felt horrible about it, and he pushed me and pushed me and pushed me to have sex with him. Kept telling me he loved me and blah, blah, blah. And I bought it, hook, line, and sinker. And so I consented, and I cried the whole time. And it didn't stop him. I cried the whole time, and when it was over, I was still crying. I felt so bad about it. And he didn't comfort me, he didn't hug me. He kissed me and then drove me home. It was in the back of his car. And he continued that kind of treatment of me until I got pregnant at the age of 15. And had an abortion because my mother forced me to. And it was just awful. And he broke up with me because, obviously I had an abortion. He didn't want, he would have broken up with me even if I hadn't had an abortion. He didn't, I was tainted at that point. And so, I had an extremely low self-esteem. I was part of the Bible study group that most of my the high school people went to. We had a football coach at our school who had an in-home Bible study group that it was mostly people from my high school, but it was also people from a couple of colleges and other high schools, but mostly our high school. And so I knew almost everybody there, and I'd been seeking the Lord my whole life. I'd been a Christian my whole life. But I always, I knew God was out there. I knew God loved me. I knew God loved people because I saw people who it was obvious they had a relationship with God. But I didn't, and I didn't know how to. I believed, I was saved, but I didn't know how to have that one-on-one relationship. So I was part of this Bible study group for a couple of years. And apparently rumors around me had gone around school, which I was not aware of till after I'd graduated. But the rumor was that I had slept with every guy in school. Woo, yay. So none of the guys in the Bible study group would come near me. And everybody kind of kept me at arm's length. They wouldn't let me be part of any of their... I was obviously part of the activities, but I was never part of anybody's friendship group, or nobody would be friends with me. Nobody would hang out with me. Nobody really wanted me around. They always kept me at arm's length. This is a Bible study group. Now, I was being abused at home. I was being abused elsewhere, and I needed help. I needed somebody. I needed love. I needed to see evidence of God's love because I desperately needed it. Now, I know God loves me. I don't blame God. I blame these people because they're fake Christians. And to this day, they are. We just had our 40th high school reunion, and they were there. They're such lying pieces of crap. There's nothing real about them. But, so I was lost, and I left, and I went to a church that a guy that I'd known all through high school, and I kind of had a crush on him, and he went to this one church, which turns out to be a cult. I didn't know it at the time, but I went to this church because I liked him, and obviously he wasn't interested in me because he's the one that was spreading the rumors about me that I'd slept with every guy in school. Wasn't that nice of him? So he did the same thing at church, and of course nobody wanted to come near me there. And but I met this one guy who was a delinquent in their eyes because he wouldn't go to church. His mother and little brother did, but he didn't. And I met him, and I thought he was cute, and we didn't really start dating at that point, but 2 years later I ran into him again at church. He wasn't there, but he went to pick up his mother from there, and I saw him and went to talk to him, and he was a little different then, towards me, a little more interested in me. And so we started going out, and right away, he wanted me to move in with him. So I did, And a few months later, we got married, and I got pregnant right away. And but even before we got married, he was beating me up. He was raping me. He was cheating on me. And I found that out the hard way. He came home one day. We'd been together for about 2.5 months. And I am the kind of person, I am an exclusive. I do not cheat. I don't believe in it. So we'd been together for 2.5 months, and he came home screaming and hollering, "You gave me gonorrhea, you whore, blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Well, I don't know who you've been with, because I don't have gonorrhea. And there's no way I could have given it to you. And so who have you been with?" And he was so convincing with his righteous anger that, I must have done something, that I was like, well, there's no way. We've been together for 2.5 months. I've got no symptoms. I hadn't been with anybody prior to him for like a month and a half. So it'd been like 4 months between the time I had been with someone and this point, besides him. And so I was like, it doesn't take 4 months for gonorrhea to show up. And he was like, "Yeah, no, I've got a really strong system, the doctor said, and, just because you don't show symptoms," and he's screaming at me, and he had me convinced that I had somehow given him gonorrhea and that it just wasn't showing up in me. And yet I believed that for a long time, and then all of a sudden I found out there's no way. He'd been cheating on me, and he got gonorrhea, and he acted like that because he needed me to go get shots just in case I got gonorrhea. Whatever. Anyway, he beat me up for 13 years and raped me for 13 years and raped me throughout my pregnancy with my son. I was 8.5 months pregnant, and he threw me up against the wall. And his family knew. He even beat me up in front of his mom and his little brother one time. And rather than help me or scream for him to stop, his mother egged him on because his mother hated me. And his parents are, oh my God, talk about criminals. They're from Germany. His dad was in the Hitler Youth. His mom's she is an insane narcissist. And they're crazy people. And so, his family knew he was doing all this stuff to me. My family knew. I've never been the kind of person that was afraid to tell people when I was being abused, which is kind of weird because most people, they're afraid to say something. I was screaming it from the freaking rooftops. I was telling everybody what happened. I was, help me, please, somebody help me. Nobody helped me. My son, was 2 months old when Fred beat me up very, very badly one night and raped me and passed out because he was drunk at the time. He was a drug addict, alcoholic, insane. And he passed out, and I managed to get his keys and his wallet from him because I didn't have a car or a job or money, and I did not have a family support system. My family knew what was going on, but they didn't care. I was out of their hair, and that's all they cared about. And so I managed to get all that from him. He purposely put them in his jeans, in his front pockets, and then fell asleep on the floor on his stomach so that I couldn't get away. Well, he passed out, and when he was asleep, that was it. Nothing could wake him up. So that was great. I got those from him, and I hid them in the toilet. In the tank of the toilet, I put them in a plastic bag, and I hid them in the tank of the toilet, so he didn't know where they were. He had to go to work, and so he got his dad to come pick him up, and he's screaming and hollering at me, "You better give him back," as he leaves. Well, I called the abuse hotline. This was 1982, okay? Or, no, by this time it was the beginning of 1983. And I called the abuse hotline, and I begged for help. And they had a shelter call me back because that was the way it worked. And the shelter said, yeah, we'll come and get you, absolutely. And in talking to them for just a couple of minutes, I realized they were saying, I get to stay for 2 weeks only. And I said, okay, so what happens after 2 weeks? Where do I go? And they said, well, in 2 weeks, it gives you time to get yourself situated. And I said, okay, I cannot get myself situated in 2 weeks. I have a 2-month-old baby, no job, no money, no car, and no family. What am I supposed to accomplish in 2 weeks' time? I can't just leave, go away for 2 weeks, and then I have to come back here. I would have to come back here. I'd have no choice. There'd be nowhere else to go. And can you imagine the beating I would get after leaving for 2 weeks? The beating would be worse coming back than it is. And I said, I might as well just stay. And she tried to convince me to leave. And I said, it wouldn't do me any good. You've got no solution beyond letting me leave for 2 weeks. And I would just have to come right back. So I stayed because I had nowhere to go. I stayed for 13 years because I had nowhere else to go. But when my son was 10, I went back to college and I busted my ass. And it took me 4 years to get a 2-year degree, but I graduated with honors. I was a founding member of the Honors Association of Honors Program Students. I graduated from the honors program. I was a member of student government. I was a member of Phi Theta Kappa, which is an honors fraternity for community colleges. I wasn't in a university, and because I paid for it myself. And I busted my ass, and I graduated with honors. I actually had a whole lot of decorations on me when I graduated because I busted my ass. And I got an accounting degree. It was an AA, but I did get an accounting degree, and I went out and I got myself a job right before graduation. I was in my last semester, and I got myself an accounting job, and I've been an accountant ever since. But finally, I was making enough money that with just a little bit of child support, I could support myself and my son by myself. Plus, at that point, my son had just turned 12, and he was old enough that I could I could be okay with him being alone at home while I'm still at work. And that just happened to be the time God supplied an out. The jackass that I was married to started cheating on me, and he found this woman who was filthy rich, and she's got zero morals or integrity or anything, so she had no problem stealing a married man away from his family, which I was okay with because I hated his guts. I'd hated him the whole time we were married. I despised him. I wouldn't let him touch me. He'd still rape me, but I wouldn't let him touch me if I had a choice in the matter. But he left me for her, which was great. And we got a divorce, thank God. And everything was great. I mean, well, he wouldn't give me any money. The divorce he drug out. He left a week before Christmas, 1994. And he did not file for divorce until Valentine's Day, 1995. And 95. And the divorce wasn't final because he kept dragging it out because he didn't want to pay child support. And in the meantime, he was not picking my son up for a visitation. He was supposed to get visitation every weekend. That was an agreement he and I made. Nothing was formal yet. And he would blow my son off. My son was 12. He desperately needed love from his father, and he never got it, but he always hoped for it. So it really devastated him. And when he did pick him up, he spent all his time mooning over his girlfriend and ignoring Steve, and it upset Steve so much that Steve said, I'm not going over there anymore. So I negotiated between the two of them. I shouldn't have, but I said, okay, why don't we just do it every other week? And when you have Steve, you pay attention to Steve, and when you don't have Steve, you can do whatever you want with your girlfriend. So they agreed to that, and the divorce was finalized at the very end of August 1995, and he married her a week later. In the meantime, somewhere in May of that year, 95, I met my husband, my real husband, the husband I'm married to now. And he was head usher at church. I'd found a new church. He was head usher there, and he was a deacon, and he was just a wonderful man, just the most wonderful man on the planet. He had 2 kids of his own. He was divorced. His wife had cheated on him, and she left him. And he was divorced. He had custody of his 2 boys because his wife couldn't be bothered to raise them, ex-wife. And so his youngest son was 2 months older than my son, and his oldest son was 2 years older. And so it was like, it was perfect. You know, we had 3 kids, and they were all the same age, and he was the most wonderful Christian man I've ever met in my life. If I were to have eternity to write all the attributes of the perfect husband, I still couldn't come close to what God gave me in him. He's perfect. Perfect for me. And I love him dearly. We just celebrated our 22nd wedding anniversary. But anyway, so I had met him waiting for this stupid divorce to be finalized, and you know, we got to know each other, and we fell in love. And so, but we were good about it. We didn't do anything. I was still married, and so we were respectful of that. And then when the divorce was final, we were dating openly, actually dating, and no sex. We did not have sex until we got married, which was 2.5 years later. We got married October of 97, and I finally had a real husband and a real family, sort of. His family sucks, but our little family was good. And my ex's wife, Stephanie, murdered him 5 years after they got married. He was murdered March of 2001, and his funeral was on our original wedding date. That's kind of appropriate. But no, she murdered him, and I thought that was pretty good. At the time, it upset me very much because I'd hated him so long, and he would not leave us alone. I skipped a big chunk of where he sued me for 2 years for custody of our son, and bribed the home study woman, the guardian ad litem who was doing the home study, Brenda Hupp of St. Petersburg, HUPP. She is a criminal. She took bribes in order to skew the report in his favor for him to get custody of our son. Brenda Hupp, formerly of the guardian ad litem in St. Petersburg. She lives in Safety Harbor, Florida. She is a criminal. She took bribes. The judge involved also took bribes. He was later exposed for taking bribes in these kinds of matters, and he killed himself. Brenda Hupp was never exposed, but I'm exposing her now. She did not include any of the convictions my ex-husband had for domestic abuse. I called the cops on him more times than you can count. He was convicted 3 times, violated his probation on every single one of them. Nobody seemed to care. And she didn't include any of that in the home study report. None of it. But instead, a bunch of lies about me. So there you go. Anyway, through all of this, I have begged for help. I've looked for support groups. I've looked for psychologists. I've looked for therapists. I've looked for, I called hotlines. I've looked for help anywhere I can get it. And guess what? It's not available. It's not available. You hear all these people talking about get a support group, call a hotline, get a therapist, get help. It's not available. There aren't any. There aren't any. And I'm asking right now if there's anybody in the Pasco, Florida area that deals with child sexual assault and adult domestic violence and rape, that helps people with PTSD for these kinds of things. Please contact me in the comments, because I need help. I've needed help my whole life and nobody will help me. And so if you've got an idea of help, please let me know. Anyway, I've given you my whole ridiculous saga. So there you go. And just to say, I absolutely adore my husband, Roy, and my son, Steve, who, by the way, even though he went to live with his father at 15, court ordered, he came banging on my door a year and a half later saying, Mom, can I please come home? And he's been with me ever since. Well, I mean, he's 37 now, but you know what I mean. So he was 18 when his father was murdered. But he was with me, and he's been with me, and he's my son, and he loves me, and he's always loved me. So, and he knew what his father was. So there's my saga. If you can help me, please do. Thanks.